I now call Andrew Rosindell.
To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs if he will make a statement on the decision by the Spanish authorities to implement border and passport checks at the frontier with Gibraltar on the 10th of October.
Anneliese Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And if I may, before I begin my remarks, I would first like to associate myself with the remarks made across the House a few moments ago after the passing of Alex Salmons. My thoughts and sympathies are with his family. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I am responding as my honourable friend, the Minister for Europe, North America and the Overseas Territories, is in Germany on government business. The Government is aware that late on Thursday the 10th of October, the Spanish border officers increased checks on permanent residents of Gibraltar crossing into Spain from Gibraltar. The change in process involved stamping the passports of all non-EU nationals crossing the border. It went against the informal bridging measures in place since EU exit and was made without warning. The increased checks were briefly reciprocated the following morning by HM Government of Gibraltar, who have full responsibility for immigration matters. This led to some disruption on the Spanish side of the border. My colleague, the Minister for Europe, North America and the UK Overseas Territories, contacted his Spanish counterpart, Fernando San Pedro, Secretary of State for the EU, in relation to this change in process. In parallel, the UK's ambassador to Spain engaged with the Spanish Ministry of the Interior. We understand that the change in process had been instigated locally by a Spanish border official. The matter was dealt with swiftly by Spain and usual border arrangements resumed. We are grateful to the Government of Spain for the continued implementation of the informal bridging measures. We are in close touch with the Government of Gibraltar, including Chief Minister Fabian Picardo, and will continue to monitor the situation. It's in all our interests that the border between Gibraltar and Spain operates smoothly. The Government, working with the Government of Gibraltar, is committed to finalising an UK-EU agreement in respect to Gibraltar as soon as possible. This would bring certainty for the people of the region and secure future prosperity. We remain steadfast in our support for Gibraltar and will only agree to terms that the Government of Gibraltar is content with. Schengen border checks at the start of EES were always expected. This is one of the reasons we are working so hard to achieve a deal. The Government continues to work with the Government of Gibraltar on how best to mitigate the impacts of border disruption should an agreement with the EU not be possible. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand today is also Gibraltar Day, when the Government of Gibraltar celebrates the links between Gibraltar and the UK. I wish it every success with its various events. Thank you.
Andrew Rosindell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Minister for her response. However, the people of Gibraltar have long memories. When Labour were last in power, the Blair government attempted to agree a joint sovereignty deal with Spain, behind the backs of the Gibraltarians and without their consent. It was all about appeasing Spain and the European Union then, and some of us fear the same could happen this time. Even if the decision to effectively impose a hard border on the 10th of October by Spain on the frontier was not made centrally, the fact that this extreme measure happened at all is incredibly concerning and a warning of what is to come if a solid bilateral agreement is not reached in the coming weeks. If a hard border is implemented, there are no winners. The people of Spain and Gibraltar both suffer. The fact that despite this, Spain continues to weaponise the frontier with the aim of exercising authority over sovereign British territory is morally and constitutionally reprehensible. There can be no Spanish boots on the rock. This must be non-negotiable. The people of Gibraltar have been bullied by the Spanish authorities over many decades. And this latest infraction comes at a critical time in the negotiations over the future of the frontier with the new Schengen area entry-exit control system on the horizon. So, does she agree that any agreement must fully acknowledge that Gibraltar is 100% British? The people of Gibraltar have made it abundantly clear that they reject any suggestion of Spanish sovereignty by voting to remain British. His Majesty's government have a duty to stand by the loyal people of Gibraltar, whatever it takes. There can be no weakening of British sovereignty, and the Gibraltarians' right of self-determination must be upheld. So with this in mind, and following the government's betrayal of the British Chagosian people only last week, will the Minister raise this incident with her counterpart in Madrid as a matter of urgency, confirm that she will never capitulate to Spain's demands to allow Spanish brutes on Gibraltarian soil in any negotiation, and guarantee the government's steadfast loyalty to the sovereign British overseas territory of Gibraltar and its people?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say I regret the tone that was adopted by the honourable gentleman. I think many of us in this House are friends of our overseas territories. We very much respect their right to sovereignty, and in that context it is critical that we always focus on the facts of the matter and do not seek to obtain party political advantage from them. I'm sure that he will have seen indeed the comments from the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, which could not have been clearer on this matter. It is inappropriate to politicise these matters. The UK Government could not have been clearer that we are confident of British sovereignty over the whole of Gibraltar, including British Gibraltar territorial waters. We are steadfast in our support for Gibraltar, and the UK Government will never, Madam Deputy Speaker, enter into arrangements under which the people of Gibraltar would pass under the sovereignty of another state against their freely and democratically expressed wishes. And we will never enter into a process of sovereignty negotiations with which Gibraltar is not content. That double lock is safe with this government, and we are fully committed to it. Thank you.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will my right honourable friend confirm that we will always support the people of Gibraltar and indeed the interests of the Government of Gibraltar?
Minister.
Absolutely, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for being so clear about this. It's very important for the UK Government to underline that commitment to sovereignty, and indeed my understanding is that the Foreign Secretary was discussing this matter just this very morning actually with his Spanish counterparts. We will continue to ensure that we focus on ensuring both sovereignty and above all the interests of everyone in the region who needs to see, for example, the deal that we have been working so hard towards. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I also join with the Right Honourable Lady in her remarks about Alex Salmond, who was a personal friend and a long-standing colleague. I mourn his loss. I thank my honourable friend for bringing this important urgent question to the House today, and the Right Honourable Lady for her response. Let me be crystal clear. There should be no need for checks at the border between Spain and Gibraltar. Reports last Friday that Spanish police were insisting on checks is alarming, and we need to get to the bottom of what happened. These checks cause misery in people's daily lives and undermine Gibraltar's trade and economy. They inconvenience Spanish people who depend for their income on their work in Gibraltar. Madam Deputy Speaker, the House needs to understand what support the government has provided to Gibraltar, and crucially what discussions the Foreign Secretary has had with his Spanish counterpart about why checks by Spanish police were carried out with no warning. I hope she can reassure the House that she has made it plain to her Spanish counterpart that this simply must not happen again. We must reject any attempt to ratchet up the pressure on the important negotiations that are taking place to secure Gibraltar's future. It is alleged, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Spain has taken note of the British government's ill-advised decision to give away the British Indian Ocean territory. The government has claimed that its commitment to our other overseas territories is unchanged, despite the agreement with Mauritius, so now is an opportunity for the government to show that they mean what they say. On the negotiations with Spain and the EU, we want to see a deal as swiftly as possible, but it needs to be the right deal and the one that both the government and the people of Gibraltar can get behind. In other words, the deal that we were negotiating before we left government. The last Conservative government was unequivocally clear in public and in private that Gibraltar's sovereignty was never up for negotiation. Madam Deputy Speaker, Gibraltar is British. Having myself visited Gibraltar to take part in a literary festival, I know, as many others in this House know, that Gibraltar is as British as bacon and eggs. The people of Gibraltar emphatically affirmed this in a referendum where 99% voted to remain British. We are counting on the government to stand squarely behind that commitment.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And that commitment is one that we share within this House. We could not be clearer on that. Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman specifically asked about details of recent events. Just to provide a little more information on that for the House, on the evening of the 10th of October, the UK Government was notified that Spanish officials had increased checks on UK nationals crossing into Spain, including permanent residents of Gibraltar. We understand, as I mentioned at the beginning, that this change in process was instigated by a local border officer, not by the Spanish authorities centrally, and the Chief Minister of HM Government of Gibraltar released a press release with further information on the situation at the time. We raised this issue as the government with the Spanish authorities, including at ministerial level. We're in close touch with the Government of Gibraltar and continue to monitor the situation. And it is in all of our interests that the border between Gibraltar and Spain operates smoothly. That has been made crystal clear by the UK Government. And while I appreciated many of the comments made by the Right Honourable Gentleman, I did regret the tone of his claims made in relation to Biot. The situation in Biot is not comparable. It's a unique agreement that has absolutely no bearing on wider UK government policy regarding our overseas territories. It's a very different issue with a very different history, and the UK remains committed to our overseas territories family. And I think if there's any question about this, again, I would refer the Right Honourable Gentleman to the comments from the Chief Minister of Gibraltar himself, who could not be clearer about his disappointment with those who seek to party politicise these matters. Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman referred to the treaty, the work towards that. The UK Government is working with the Government of Gibraltar to progress a treaty which protects sovereignty, UK military autonomy and secures future prosperity for Gibraltar and the region, and we remain steadfast in that process in our support for Gibraltar and will only agree to terms that the Government of Gibraltar is content with.
Tim Roca.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It seems that we're treated to another bout of recklessness by the party opposite this week on foreign policy. Can the Minister confirm that British sovereignty over Gibraltar is not up for negotiation, and to suggest otherwise is both wrong and irresponsible?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for making that point. I absolutely can make that confirmation. The UK Government is committed to the double lock. We will never enter into arrangements under which the people of Gibraltar would pass under the sovereignty of another state against their freely and democratically expressed wishes, and we will never enter into a process of sovereignty negotiations with which Gibraltar is not content.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson James McLeary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first associate myself with the comments in the Chamber today about the untimely passing of Alex Salmond? My thoughts are with his family at this terrible time. Liberal Democrats believe in the right to self-determination for the people of Gibraltar. Nothing should happen to diminish this. It was over 20 years ago now, as previously mentioned, that Gibraltarians overwhelmingly rejected the idea that Spain should have joint sovereignty. Another idea that Gibraltarians overwhelmingly rejected was, of course, leaving the European Union. They have had to live with the consequences of these decisions that were imposed upon them and the botched Brexit deal negotiated by the last government. I commend the Government of Gibraltar for their principled and pragmatic approach to the future border arrangements with Spain. And does the Minister agree with me that nothing should be decided for the people of Gibraltar without the consent of the people of Gibraltar? Given the extension of the talks, it's important that they conclude in the spirit of cooperation. So has the Minister received any assurances from Spain that there will be no repeat of the actions last week while the Gibraltar treaty negotiations continue?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for the points that he has made, and I absolutely agree with his characterisation of the position of the people of Gibraltar and indeed the UK Government's commitment to them. He asked about the deal that is currently being negotiated. I think all sides agree on the importance of concluding an EU-UK treaty as soon as possible. That will bring certainty for the people of the region and secure future prosperity as well. We're absolutely determined to make progress on this issue, but above all, that double lock will always stay in place. Thank you.
Kevin Bolivier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was very sorry to hear the member for Romford use such militaristic undertones in what is a very unfortunate incident for the Gibraltarians. We have heard. I was also very disappointed to hear the confected outrage once again about the future sovereignty of Gibraltar. Today, Gibraltarians want to know that they can go about their daily lives, and I would like to hear the Minister reassure the House that she is doing everything she can to calm the tensions that have arisen from this incident.
Minister.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for making those points, and it really is important that the interests of Gibraltarians, their daily lives being as smooth as possible, and their sovereignty always being at the forefront of these issues and not party politics. Thank you.
Mark Francois.
Thank you. History shows again and again that appeasement doesn't work. It was inevitable that after the abject surrender of the Chagos Islands, for that is what it is, the Spanish would try and exert pressure on Gibraltar. Honourable members shake their heads. The government is so embarrassed by the Chagos deal, they won't even tell the House of Commons what we're going to have to pay to rent back our own base. That's how embarrassed you are. So coming back to Gibraltar, my honourable friend is quite right. Under Blair, Labour tried to sell them out for joint sovereignty, and a referendum killed it. So as we couldn't trust you on Gibraltar before, why on earth, after what you've done to Chagos and the Chagosians, should we trust you now?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I really do regret this, to be honest, slightly playground-style characterisation of issues that are so fundamental for people, particularly those who live in Gibraltar. I did mention the comments of the First Minister of the Falklands before, and I'm afraid that I've been forced to quote them, given the nature of what the member just said. He said some of these claims are more about party politics, blame gaming and Tory party leadership issues than they're actually about the sovereignty of people who live in the overseas territories. I don't think he could have been clearer.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that the actions we've seen over the last few days risk damaging the regional economy in Spain as much as they do Gibraltar, and therefore that's why all sides must work together so we don't see a recurrence of what we've seen over these last few days?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly agree with my honourable friend. There is, of course, very substantial traffic of goods and of people across the border very regularly indeed. It's absolutely fundamental for the economy of Gibraltar, but also, of course, for Andalusia as well, and for Spain, and indeed more broadly for the entire region. So it really is important that that is borne in mind, as well as, of course, the sovereignty issues that we're talking about.
Stephen Gethings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister will agree with me that she doesn't think the people of Scotland came second on much. But they did come second in terms of their overwhelming rejection of Brexit to the people of Gibraltar. They saw through this disastrous Tory deal that has led to many of the problems that we see today. Does she think the people of Gibraltar are better off with this Tory Brexit deal? Or did the people of Gibraltar see something through and value our EU membership that the Tories don't?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wouldn't seek to speak for the people of Gibraltar. That wouldn't be appropriate. I think what is most important, however, now is that we ensure there is progress around that UK-EU deal on these matters. I see that, for example, the Foreign Secretary, Minister Doughty, and Chief Minister of Gibraltar met the European Commission Executive Vice President Šefčovič and the Spanish Foreign Minister Albares in Brussels in September to have discussions around this. Those discussions are focused on the issues that I understand many people in Gibraltar are very concerned about, that movement of people and goods in particular, and this government is determined to make progress.
Adam Jurgey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents in Newcastle and Lyme are proud to be British, just as the people of Gibraltar are, and I join the Minister in acknowledging Gibraltar Day. I'm afraid, though, that some in this House haven't listened to the Minister's response. So can I ask her to be as clear as possible in answering my point, and be clear that this government will only ever stand with the people of Gibraltar for as long as they want us to stand with them?
Minister. Very grateful to my honourable friend for his question, and the clearest answer that I can say is yes, yes and yes.
Jess Brown-Fuller.
Deputy Speaker. Last week, my mother was desperately trying to get out of Gibraltar and back to the UK to be with my grandmother, who had suddenly turned very ill and was receiving end-of-life care. The plane she was due to get on diverted to Malaga due to adverse weather conditions, but the border was closed to the passengers, stranding British citizens in Gibraltar with no rescheduled flight and no offer of accommodation. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to put on record my sincere thanks to the Minister for Europe, North America and for the Overseas Territories, and also for the Honourable Member for Central Ayrshire for your advice and guidance during that very distressing period last week. Can the Minister advise, taking into account the challenges that Gibraltar Airport faces, what steps she is taking to ensure that British passport holders facing emergencies can cross the border into Spain and return home swiftly?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I know the whole House would want to send our very best wishes to her grandmother and regret the really difficult situation that it is very clear her family was placed in. The government absolutely recognises the challenges here and has been working hard on them, and I'm very grateful for her kind recognition of that in her comments. There have, of course, been two challenges, both those around disruption caused by bad weather, for example to Malaga, when otherwise there would have been planes landing on Gibraltar, but also issues, as she mentioned, with the airport. They've been caused due to ingress of water into the airport. I do want to pay tribute, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the RAF staff who've been working round the clock to try and set that right. We do recognise the disruption here, and we will continue to make many representations in order to ensure that those who should be able to smoothly exit and enter Gibraltar can do so in the future.
Sammy Wilson.
Deputy Speaker, there's no doubt about it. Last week, the Spanish authorities sought to hold the British people of Gibraltar hostage by putting on border controls and disrupting their travel. And one shouldn't be surprised at this, and I know that the members opposite try to deny it. There is a connection between what happened in the Chagos Islands last week and the aggressiveness of the Spanish authorities and the EU this week. And the EU have learnt a lesson, not just from this government, from the last government. When it comes to wanting to put their footprint on British territory, British governments successively, whether in Northern Ireland or now in Gibraltar, have shown that they're willing to concede. Can the Minister give us an assurance that she will not be giving in to the bullying and the bribery and the attempts by the Spanish government and the EU to once again put its imprint on British territory?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm afraid I have to wholly reject the claims made by the honourable member. BIOT is a unique agreement. It's based on the unique history and circumstances of BIOT. That has absolutely no bearing on the wider UK government policy regarding our other overseas territories. It's not just, if I may say so, the government that's stating that. It's also people living within those overseas territories who are very clear about the party politicking that has gone on around this. The United Kingdom will never enter into arrangements under which the people of Gibraltar would pass under the sovereignty of another state against their freely and democratically expressed wishes. We could not be clearer about that.
Oh, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The unforced surrender of the Chagos Islands casts a long shadow, does it not? Yes. Are we seriously to believe that the timing of the Government of Spain's action in respect of Gibraltar has nothing to do with the unforced error that the government has committed in recent days? And is it not the case that this government will always put ideology, virtue signalling, post-colonial guilt ahead of the defence and security of this country?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am disappointed by the tone of the member's claims, particularly given, as I understand it, his interest in historical matters, particularly military matters in the past. As a result, I would hope that he would be aware, but perhaps he is not, that Gibraltar was ceded by the Crown of Spain to the Crown of Great Britain under Article 10 of the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713. That's in contrast to the history of Bayet, completely different, which was established by UK initiative as a colonial power and where the modalities of that establishment have long been contested. The United Kingdom is steadfast in its commitment to Gibraltar, its people and its economy, and he surely should be aware of that. Thank you.
Al Pinkerton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. Negotiations on Gibraltar's post-Brexit status are well advanced, but are not without their hurdles. One such hurdle relates to the stationing of armed and uniformed Spanish border officers at Gibraltar's air and seaports, a proposal that Gibraltarians, understandably, cannot tolerate. So I ask the Minister today, can she assure this House on Gibraltar Day that the wishes of Gibraltarians will always be paramount within the ongoing negotiations, that the Government have taken the opportunity to remind all parties that the lives and livelihoods of Gibraltarians and others should never be used as leverage in these negotiations, however inadvertently or locally applied they may be, and for the sake of the people and communities of Gibraltar and La Linea, that this will never be allowed to happen again.
Minister.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his question. First, he asked about whether the interests and the concerns of Gibraltarians will be paramount. They absolutely will be. We remain steadfast in our support for Gibraltar, and we will only agree to terms that the Government of Gibraltar is content with in a deal. And furthermore, the kind of leverage he discussed would never be accepted by the UK Government. And if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the objectives of having a treaty is precisely to remove border checks between Spain and Gibraltar. Thank you.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Lady talks about the negotiations. The problem is this government doesn't have a great track record on negotiations. What did they get from the train driver negotiations? A lot of very cold pensioners. What did they get from the negotiations with Chagos Islands? They appear to have given away sovereign territory and paid for the privilege. How can we trust this government with the safety of Gibraltar?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The very peculiar and unfounded analogy that the opposite benches appear to attempt to draw has been rejected by those living in those overseas territories. You can see this for what it is, party politicking, when we should be instead focused on the interests of those living in overseas territories and our obligations to them. Thank you.
Jim Allister.
Thank you. The Minister said that the Spanish authorities had assured the government that the aggressive actions taken at the border were not centrally approved. Does the government accept that? And when it comes to the attempts by the Spanish authorities to insert themselves into Gibraltar, never mind the Chagos Islands, might they not be drawing more succour from the fact that the British government allowed the EU to insert itself into the United Kingdom, to put a border in the Irish Sea, to pass the laws that govern much of the economy of part of the United Kingdom, and might the Spanish authorities not be concluding, in consequence of that, that the UK government is a soft touch when it comes to sovereignty?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Actually, I believe the UK Government could not have been clearer in our representations on this matter, including with the Spanish government. On the 11th of October, Minister Doughty contacted, as I mentioned before, Minister Fernando San Pedro, his Spanish counterpart. The UK ambassador to Spain also called on the Spanish Ministry of the Interior as well to inquire about this change in approach, and we've been absolutely clear that His Majesty's Government will continue to work closely with the HM Government of Gibraltar, including on border disruption planning, and we will do all we can to ensure, above all, that the interests of Gibraltarians are put front and centre on this. That is what is driving the government response.
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister not agree with me that the reality is that a low-level border guard at the Gibraltarian-Spanish border would not have implemented this without at least knowledge and tacit consent from Madrid? Correct. Given this, how can she continue to negotiate in good faith with Spain if they continue this low-level aggression at the border?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, it really is important that we do ensure that we negotiate in order to obtain that treaty that is needed. It's that treaty, that EU-UK treaty, which ultimately is going to be ensuring that the interests of the people of Gibraltar are front and centre. Now, progress has been made by the current government on those negotiations. We continue with them in earnest, because it's only through those negotiations ultimately that, as I said, the interests of Gibraltarians can be put first, and surely that is what this House should be supporting as well.
Edward Morello.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has told us that the restrictions that were imposed were done so unilaterally by a local border official. If that is the case, then can the Minister outline exactly what guarantees the government has received from the Spanish government that such powers will not be localised and that local officials can't impose powerful restrictions on Gibraltarians and Spanish people looking to work in Gibraltar?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, ensuring the fluid movement of people across the Gibraltar-Spain land border is a top priority for the UK Government. Border fluidity is important, of course, for shared prosperity and for the security of citizens and businesses in the region. And the UK Government and the Government of Gibraltar are committed to ensuring this continues, and it will continue to be absolutely critical for the representations that we will continue to make to the Government of Spain as well.
I'll now allow the front benches to change over.